Hey guys, I'm about to show you one of the most important videos I've ever made. I'm going to show you statistically what is killing Cessna 310 pilots. If you don't fly a 310 and you fly any other piston twin, I guarantee you the same thing that's killing Cessna 310 pilots is killing Baron, Seminole, Seneca, Aztec pilots. So don't touch that dial. Let's go through the data, and more importantly, let's talk about what you can do to keep yourself safe and minimize your risk of ending up as a statistic. Stay tuned. What better way to stay safe in the make and model of airplane that we fly than to understand what historically has killed pilots, the causes of fatal accidents? And that's what this study is. I originally started this study back in 2008 when I bought my first 310 because I wanted to understand just that very thing. I wanted to understand what was killing 310 pilots and what I could do to mitigate risk for myself. Subsequently, I've updated the data to present day. So the study that you're going to see first was accident data from the NTSB accident database from 1983 up to 2008. And then I'm going to roll in and add the data in from 2008 to present day. So let's dig into it. So first of all, let's look at overall fatal Cessna 310 accidents starting in 1965, because that's the database I had access to up to present day. So first of all, the upper graph is showing the number of fatal accidents in Cessna 310s per year. So on the far left, 1965, there were 11 fatal accidents. Now look at what happens over time. They peak in about 1969, 1970, there were 15 accidents a year, which is shocking. And then if you look kind of starting around the late 90s, mid to late 90s, the accident rate really drops and it starts to kind of level off. And it's still decreasing. Here in 2021, there were 2 fatal accidents, and here in 2020 to date, it's November 9th, there's been 1 this year. Hopefully there's no more. But if you really look at the last kind of 2 decades, the accident rate's almost flat. It's just kind of slowly decreasing, which is good. Now you might be saying to yourself, well, does this account for fleet size and number of hours flown per year? Well, the short answer to that is I'm sure there's an influence. I think people flew more probably back in the heyday of aviation in the 60s and 70s, but the lower graph kind of normalizes this relative to the fleet size data. So I took data from the FAA website on the piston twin fleet size, not just Cessna 310s, but all piston twins, just to see how the rate fit relative to the fleet size. And what it's showing is this kind of hyperbolic fit. It is showing that in general, the number of accidents per year relative to the fleet size is decreasing over time. So here are fatal Cessna 310 accidents between 1983 and 2008. Just a quick housekeeping note. Why 1983? Back in 2008, when I did this study originally after I bought my first airplane, the NTSB accident database only had really detailed reports from 1983 and newer. So the accident reports before 1983 were just kind of short textual-based statements that didn't have a lot of meat to them, so it was difficult to understand exactly sometimes what the cause of the accident was. So I took the kind of proper PDF accident reports from 1983 that had a lot of substance to them and went forward from there. And of course, 2008 is when I bought this first airplane. So we'll look at the later data here coming up. But this, as a snapshot in 2008, this is what was killing Cessna 310 pilots. So first of all, VFR into IMC. So this is both loss of control in the clouds and also controlled flight into terrain, CFIT. These are guys, that shouldn't be flying in IMC because they're VFR only. And it's just a staggering number. I mean, you can see they're up at the top here. These are obviously ranked from worst to least worst, I guess, for lack of better terms, at the bottom. But I mean, it's just an epidemic of guys without their instrument rating flying these fast, heavy, slippery machines where they shouldn't be. Number 2, loss of control while flying IMC. So these are instrument rated pilots who are losing control of the airplane while they're flying in IMC. Sometimes it's en route. I haven't differentiated. Most of the time, though, it tended to be right after takeoff or in the approach or terminal area. Stall spin is number 3. Not surprising. That continues to kill pilots in both twins and singles. Number 4 is a bit shocking. Fuel starvation and mismanagement. I just don't see how you can get yourself into this position. So make sure you get checked out in the airplane you're flying and understand your fuel system and carry plenty of fuel. Number 5 actually kind of shocked me that this prevalent, Vmc loss of control. So this is basically engine failure, which is the root cause, but it's the pilot's inability to handle the single engine scenario and, crashing. Now, I want to differentiate something here. I'll show a bit later that there are maintenance-induced accidents. There are inherent in this data, Vmc loss of control, there are some maintenance-induced errors. That's kind of the primary root cause of some of these Vmc loss of controls. But at the end of the day, the buck stopped at the pilot, and I didn't really separate those out when I did that study. So CFIT, night VFR, controlled flight into terrain at night. Again, I mean, that's a big killer is the next one. Unexplained loss of control VFR. This is a bit head scratcher. I mean, some of these were in kind of hazy conditions, so you could argue, are they really VFR? But technically they are. I also wonder if there's some medical incapacitations inherent in this data in this group. So that's possible, a possibility. Next, flight into thunderstorms. Yep, not a surprise, that continues to happen. Descent below MDA or decision height and just crashing into something. I mean, that's still quite common. VFR, night, loss of control and disorientation. I mean, you could kind of group that with VFR into IMC, not technically, but that's why it's separate. But really, it's kind of the same thing. It's guys that don't have the ability to control the airplane on instruments alone, because a lot of times at night you basically are flying on instruments. And then I'm not going to list all of them out, but you can still see below that kind of the common things, icing, etc. Loss of control and a missed approach. I separated that out because it is one of these things that I don't think pilots train enough for is doing a missed approach. And then the rest are pretty well self-explanatory. Now, as far as I mentioned, these don't include fatal accidents due to improper or faulty maintenance. So for the period of 83 to 2008, there were 7 fatal accidents attributed to faulty maintenance. There was 1 electrical fire that resulted in the pilot and the airplane burning up in midair. There was 1 electrical failure at night that led to loss of control. There was 1 loss of control due to a trim tab failure, and I'll mention this later. There were 2 more after 2008 that resulted in this trim tab airworthiness directive. And then there were 4 that were just general poor practices by mechanics. And I can't recall from the original study what they were. I think one of them was misrigged controls, and when the pilot rotated, the airplane rolled over and it killed him, that kind of thing. So it's that kind of thing that's just gross misconduct on the part of the mechanic. Okay, next, let's look at the fatal accident rate in Cessna 310s, root cause, from 2008 to 2022, and that's actually the orange bars on the graph. So the blue bars are actually the data pre-2008, so I hope that's not confusing with the title, but we're looking at the orange data. Now, follow me on the logic. The pre-2008 accident rate, if you represent that by the blue curved line on the bar chart, if the same identical accident rates per category were persistent in the period from 2008 to 2022, there would be proportional scaling. So all the orange bars would be, they'd be lower in magnitude, but they'd follow something akin to the orange curved line. So what you could argue is the 2008 to 2022 data that lies to the left of that orange line means that rate is lower than expected, and vice versa, the orange bar graphs that lie to the right of the orange line are where the rate is higher relative to the trend. Now, here's the problem. The 2008 to 2022 data, the accident rate's way lower, so this may be a slightly lower sample database, but as you're going to see here in a minute, I think the trends we're seeing do make sense with reality. So first, here are kind of the four things that stand out as appearing to have a lower than expected accident rate over the period from 2008 to 2022. Number one, VFR into IMC. The accident rate's gone down. Why? This is why I think. It's just a theory. I don't have any hard data to support it, but I think with the advent of the EFIS systems and primary flight displays with a bigger representation of what the horizon looks like, we're seeing less people get into trouble. Stall spins are down. I can't explain that. Maybe better training, maybe more awareness. There's a lot of people that have installed VGs on their airplanes. I don't know what percentage of the fleet has VGs, but maybe that's why. Fuel starvation, mismanagement has gone way down. Again, I would attribute that to poor flight and people having engine monitors installed. It seems like a lot of the 310s you see for sale now have at least an engine monitor with a fuel totalizer. That could be the reason behind that. And again, CFIT night VFR has gone way down. And again, I attribute that to the large format primary flight displays. Now, what about accident rates that appear to have kind of stayed consistent? Well, there's two that stand out to me. One is loss of control while flying IMC. It's still getting us instrument rated pilots. And then finally, icing still seems to be pretty prevalent. And that's kind of a judgment thing. I'm not sure there's really technology out there that stops people from pushing the limits of their aircraft's ability in icing. Okay, the final thing, as far as what appears to be lying above the trend, which has a higher prevalence relative to the trend line, is VMC loss of control. This one's a bit of a head scratcher for me. I've got two theories, and they may or may not be right. I don't know. I'm grasping at straws here. But one theory is in the last kind of 10 or 15 years, inflation's really biting. I mean, aviation's getting more and more expensive. Definitely in the last few years since the pandemic, but even before that, things are just generally getting more expensive, and I wonder if maintenance is suffering. I'm sure some of these accidents are due to engine failure, with the root cause being maintenance induced, and then the pilot's inability ultimately to handle the loss of an engine is what causes the fatal accident. The other thing, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but I also know we have a high proportion of retired airline pilots who own 310s, and I also wonder if they're just used to the excess thrust that jets have and the ability to climb out in one engine, and it just bites them when this happens in a piston twin with all the ensuing induced drag and drag of the inoperative engine and the low thrust to weight ratios. So, but I truly don't know, but it is kind of head scratching and disappointing that there still seems to be such a prevalence of VMC loss of control accidents. So comment below in the comments if you have an idea of why you think we're still seeing this. And I would really love to see some data on other twins like the Baron and see if this is still what the data shows for their aircraft make and model. Okay, so here's the finale. This is all the data combined. Fatal Cessna 310 accidents, 1983 to present day, 2022, the time of this video. So there's been a slight reordering of things, but the top four are really the things that stand out to me as the main cause of fatal accidents for us. Number one, VFR into IMC, both controlled flight into terrain and loss of control. Number two, loss of control while flying IMC, that's instrument rated pilots. Number three, VMC loss of control. And remember, we just talked about that still pretty high rate of that occurrence in recent times. And number four, stall spin. That one's not surprising. Fuel starvation mismanagement's number five. But remember, most of those accidents, we've decreased the prevalence of that. Most of those accidents occurred in the earlier time period. And then if you want, you can pause the video here and go through the rest of the list. But the most important thing is next, let's talk about mitigation strategies to avoid becoming a statistic. Now that we know what kills us, what kills twin pilots, let's talk about some of the things you can do to avoid falling victim. Okay, the meat of this video, let's now sit down and have a fireside chat on a mitigation strategy for the top 5 killers here. So first of all, reminder, number one was VFR into IMC. This is for non-instrument rated pilots. For God's sakes, get your instrument rating. I'm sorry, unless you're just flying to $100 hamburgers on day VFR days, you need to get your instrument rating. These are traveling machines. You can cover a lot of ground with them. If you are using your 310 or any twin for that matter for serious cross-country work, you must get your instrument rating. Better scheduling, trip management is another idea. And again, this is just a brainstorm. There's probably other things here, but if you've got an important meeting back in town on Monday morning and the weather looks questionable on Sunday, should you really take your plane? I mean, should you really fly somewhere for the weekend in your plane? Maybe it's best just to airline or drive or reschedule it. Practicing under the hood with a CFI, and along that same matter, if you're going to do that, practice the escape turns. That's just a 180-degree standard rate turn to get back out from whence you came. Let's face it, you were in VFR, you got into the clouds. In theory, if you turn around, assuming terrain's not an issue, you should be able to get back to safety. Finally, get your instrument rating, okay? I'm not going to belabor that point anymore, but really these airplanes, it should be a requirement. Okay, number two, loss of control in IMC. This is instrument rated pilots. Again, just a partial list, things that I could think of. Proficiency, even if you don't need a IPC, maybe it's worth just going up with an instructor or a friend as a safety pilot every 6 months and just practicing some approaches under the hood. Number two, use an autopilot. I use my autopilot IFR probably 95% of the flight. That's what the airlines do. They do it for a reason. I already know how to hand fly the airplane. I can go out and hand fly an ILS approach to satisfy my currency, but in day-to-day, real-world IFR flying, I use my autopilot constantly. Also, develop some standard operating procedures. I'm going to do a video on this in the future, but just kind of have a regimented, kind of consistent way that you fly approaches and departures, etc., just like the airlines use. And finally, set some personal minimums. For example, I will not take off unless A, the visibility is a mile or more, and B, I know I can get back in on whatever the lowest approach is that serves the airport. Okay. Number three, VMC loss of control. Again, brainstorming here. Maintenance, don't skimp on maintenance. Training, just annual training. Go up with an instructor and do some training if you feel comfortable doing it in the real airplane. I personally don't feel super comfortable flying with an MEI doing simulated engine failures on my plane, especially with so many MEIs where I live that, you know, are inexperienced or young and kind of fresh with their ticket. So I choose to do the third item on that list on the right, simulator. I do a simulator school every other year that I'm not doing my BFR. So in other words, year one, I do my biannual flight review in a Cessna 182 or 172. And then year two, I do a simulator school for the twin Cessna. Year three, I do my BFR. Year four, I do the simulator school, etc. As well, operationally, weight control, you know, keep your weight down. Don't tanker fuel if you need to, just to give yourself better single engine performance. Choose your runway wisely. If you're at an airport and there's a 8,000 foot runway with no obstacles, and then another runway that's 4,000 feet with trees, you know, choose the extra taxi distance to get to the longer runway. Just stack the cards in your favor. And finally, density altitude control. Try to take off in the morning when it's cool if you're in the mountains versus in the heat of the afternoon when your performance is degraded. Okay, next, stall spin. VGs, I guess. I mean, you could install VGs, that might help. Of course, training. The concept of a minimum maneuvering speed. This is Dan Greider and Blanco Lirio and Josh Flowers at Aviation 101. They've all been, and Flight Chops, they've all been pushing the concept of a minimum maneuvering speed. I do this in the terminal area. I don't have it marked on my airspeed indicator, but I maneuver around 115 to 120 knots. And get yourself a pitch and power setting for this. For my airplane, this is 115 to 120 knots, which is well above blue line. And that I get that with a cruise RPM and about 17.5 inches manifold pressure. So I don't have to fiddle with my power. I just know when I'm in the terminal area and I need to maneuver, I set my power and, you know, my speed is going to be fine. Finally, fuel starvation, mismanagement. Really no excuse for this, but proper checkout and transition training is key. I frustratingly saw somebody on the Twin Cessna Facebook page recently who, it was obvious to me he'd already been flying his airplane, and he was asking about how to manage his fuel system. It's like, oh my gosh, have you not done a proper checkout with a Twin Cessna CFI MEI at this point? Really, you shouldn't be winging this stuff and trying to figure it out from a forum online. You really need a proper checkout. Other things, know the time in your tanks, know how much fuel you burn and climb and how much you burn in cruise, and approximately how much time you have to fuel exhaustion. And then as well as having an IFR alternate, have a VFR alternate. You know, already research where you can get a hotel and get fuel if you can't make it to your destination because you don't have enough fuel to get there because of a weather deviation or whatnot. So to summarize all this, the key point in this video, if you're a VFR only pilot, you really should consider getting your instrument rating. If you're not going to get your instrument rating and you want to remain a VFR pilot, then I would highly recommend that you go up with an instructor at least annually and practice under the hood. For those of us that are IFR pilots, it's simple. Stay proficient. Fly as much as you can using the autopilot if you're equipped. If you're not equipped with an autopilot and you can afford it, I'd highly recommend getting one. If you're not going to do that, then do like the airlines and at least every 6 months go up with an instructor and under the hood and shoot some approaches and stay proficient. So I hope this helps. More videos soon. As always, thanks for watching.